Good morning. Fast history. Ghostwriting as a profession, rather than side job, is relatively new to the literary world. Sure, there have been ghosts as far back as the written word, but once the printing press replaced scribes, it was never a way to make a steady living, at least not for more than one individual. That's why people like David Ritz, the ghostwriter to the stars, who ghosted memoirs for just about everyone from Ray Charles to Don Rickles, always puts his name on the books he writes. When he launched his career back in the latter part of the 20th century, ghostwriting was not a normal profession. It was something he alone did, and damn it, he had his ego. At least that's what he told me and a room full of other people at the first Ghostwriters Unite conference. All that changed when instant celebrityhood took off like crazy. Technology let more and more people get their thoughts down easily without having to worry about handwriting. And the triple whammy of rapid laser printing, otherwise known as print on demand, the print industry implosion, and social media's eruption invited everyone into everyone else's life. Suddenly, over 80% of the population needed to write a book, and those who were serious needed someone who could produce a marketable literary property out of their dictated or written ideas. Someone like us. We'd like you to take away from this video the logical evolution of writers and editors, and why trained professional ghostwriters are so vital in today's book industry. Now, it's always been a sweet idea that authors toiled over their works of art, shut up alone with nothing but their imagination, a sheaf of paper, and a fountain pen. But in fact, that's a fairly modern conceit. Throughout most of human existence, the person with the ideas was seldom the one who transferred their thoughts onto a sustainable medium. Let's unpack that. The earliest writings, beyond, cave drawings and hieroglyphics, Chinese bone oracles and that sort, have come down to us as scriptures of one religion or another. Hinduism, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Shinto, Buddhism, Jainism, Confucianism, Taoism, Christianity, Islam, more or less in that order. Religious practitioners tend to hold their set of scripture was handed down or at least inspired by their God, but some human had to etch those inspired words onto papyrus. You might say those men were the original ghostwriters. They wrote down what someone else dictated and then cleaned it up for public consumption. Printed books existed in Asia centuries before Gutenberg. Math, observations, thoughts, and teachings were handwritten and copied onto clay, papyrus, wax, and eventually parchment. Man as a species has always been a self-admiring creature, so the ancients could not conceive of a world not exactly like their own, and that particular aspect of human nature continues to this day. Most current authors cannot conceive how some people do not agree with or even grasp the logic and rightness of their own observations, thoughts, and teachings. It's a polarizing stance that affects every aspect of 21st century life, still today, from food to politics to the creation of life itself, even to the anthropomorphizing of animals. Growing up, I had a dog named Taffy who always knew when I was upset, but she never once helped me with my math homework, even though I repeated those times tables to her endlessly. And despite the plethora of books, articles, and other media that insist animals have the same sensibilities as humans, written by authors who cannot conceive how people do not see the logic and rightness of their argument, none of my cats have ever cared about the size, shape, color, or even cleanliness of the receptacle that holds their food. I know, I asked them. Bringing that back around to writing, I seriously doubt the ancient leaders who wanted their thoughts preserved were the ones who did the actual stylus to clay or wax inscriptions. They dictated to someone who knew how to do the job. Need I belabor this point? No matter the nomenclature of the times, the ones with the implements were ghostwriters. Let's fast forward to modern times. Post-Gutenberg, post-centuries of did Alexander Dumas use a ghost? Did Shakespeare use a ghost? Did Benjamin Franklin ghostwrite for other authors or just use a pseudonym for himself? By the time Europeans began migrating to America, the population was loosely divided among those who could read and write, those who could read but not write, and those who could do neither. But again, it's human nature to believe only the literate have ideas worth sharing, which may be why some folks vilify ghostwriting. I imagine they have a problem conceiving the world as anything other than what they see and believe. By the mid-20th century, anyone in the public eye either wanted to or were compelled by circumstances to write a book. Politicians, musicians, radio stage and screen personalities, even PhDs who had to publish or perish. And please spare me your outrage. Not all PhDs had the time or capacity to churn out their obligated postdoctorate literary properties. Isn't that what grad students are for? Fact is, most leaders, celebrities, and scholars have always needed editorial assistance. Fortunately, publishing companies always knew they had to restructure, revise, and tweak the titles they acquired up to literary and industry and house-specific editorial standards. In other words, and this is important, they turned good manuscripts into marketable literary properties. Now, those people were variously labeled as editors, but considering the detailed job they did, and they were a team of editors, I'm going to call them what they really were. They were publishing house ghostwriters. Just as fortunately, a bevy of literary-minded people were also available, for a price, to help those authors whose work wasn't strong or clean or compelling enough to land a client or publisher so they could get a publishing house ghostwriter to turn their manuscript into a marketable literary property. Eventually, various layers of expertise emerged. Proofreaders, copy editors, work-for-hire writers, paid collaborators, and ghost co-authors, and later on, substantive editors, developmental editors, and, whether or not the individual put their name on the cover or copyright, ghostwriters. Personal story. My very first book, For Musicians Only, was published by Watson Guptill so long ago ISBNs hadn't been invented yet. There were no barcodes. As a working drummer and professional eye candy, I opened the book with a direct, grammatically correct, well-known music biz axiom. Personnel is the music business. My Billboard's book imprint editor changed the line to the music business is made up of people or something like that. I don't remember the exact words. But of course, my coworkers and I were outraged by that and all the other myriad changes he made to our quote-unquote perfect manuscript. We had exactly zero knowledge about the book industry. Less than nothing. No clue whatsoever. Not unlike most authors and writers still today. With my current knowledge base, I understand the need for the change. My version spoke solely to fellow musicians who instantly recognized insider cliché. The publisher's version, with its amendments all the way through the entire text, spoke not only to a broader market, but to the supply chain people and entities that would be, reading this book to assess whether or not they wanted to pick it up and sell it. Now, my version would have definitely sold dozens of copies, maybe 100 or so. Their version, on the other hand, was plugged on MTV, reprinted 3 times, and sold tens of thousands of copies. And the 3 of us authors made enough royalties twice a year to buy, bags of groceries. There's very little money in being an author. Moving on. As the field of publishing houses grew over the mid to late 20th century, so did the number of people who wanted to see their name on the cover of a book. Publishers no longer received dozens of submissions per month. They received hundreds, even thousands per week. They often had to make tough choices based on not just the manuscript's content or story, but as the decades went by, its marketability and eventually its readiness for production. This was a windfall for all those various layers of editors, but not so much for all the authors who paid them. It came to be an open industry secret that at least 50% of all traditionally and successfully self-published titles had been worked on by someone like us, regardless of what title they used: book doctor, book shepherd, line editor, or, frankly, ghostwriter. Meanwhile, those authors who opted for more affordable and often more amiable editing bemoaned their inability to attract a literary agent or land a publisher in writers' meetings and conferences and coffee klatches. An ever-increasing number of them complained about their editor or editors changing their words, changing their meaning, even changing their intent, not realizing that, well, those editors could not conceive their authors would not agree with the logical, obviously correct alterations. When the print industry imploded in 2009, that freelance editorial population literally flooded with displaced in-house editors and staff writers. At the same time, so did the number of people who suddenly not only wanted to write a book, but needed to write a book. For the growing platform of dozens or even hundreds of social media friends who they were sure would eagerly buy their book and, of course, immediately grasp and agree with their wisdom, thoughts, or storyline. Billions of people at that point. Right? Because while we may not live in caves anymore or inscribe divine-inspired dictates onto papyrus, humans are still the same inwardly focused, narrow-visioned creatures we ever were. And all that liberty had its consequences. Editorial quality took an absolute bomb dive. The first ebook years produced very few excellent titles and even fewer memorable ones. Wallets emptied as scams abounded. Hearts broke. Dreams died. Fortunately, new heroes rose to restore sanity. That's right, ghostwriters. Today we have three distinct types of ghostwriters. Those who, being gifted writers themselves, author books based on their clients' dictated or written ideas. Those who write good books from their author's ideas with an eye on the imagined reader. And those who create marketable literary properties from their author's written or dictated ideas. Ghostwriting Professional Designation Program is designed to help you become a professional book industry insider who creates marketable literary properties from your author's ideas, written or not, a la the publishing ghostwriters of yesteryear. Welcome to your first mindset transition. So, to recap, ghostwriting has been around since man first sought to preserve his thoughts and stories. Ghostwriting includes editing, absolutely, but is far more than just editing. Certified ghostwriters do not command authority, respect, and high-end professional fees because they're good writers. There are hundreds of thousands of good, even great writers out there. They command all that because they have knowledge and insights most of those hundreds of thousands of other writers do not know, and often cannot or will not even recognize they need to know. 21st century ghostwriting fills, or restores as it were, the industry-oriented editorial passes that traditional publishers used to do in-house. Ghostwriters take raw ideas, first drafts, and even well-edited manuscripts, and elevate them into marketable literary properties. It's that simple and that complex.